Hello and welcome to the Hardy Brain, the show that takes athletic, introverted entrepreneurs and leaders and transforms them into ironclad brain performers. I'm your host, Dr. David Hardy, and today on our show, we've got another amazing guest. He is the creator of Energetic NLP, has spent 11 years in medical research and 30 years working with Fortune 100 companies to create exceptional leaders and teams. And he has even done energy work with rough laborers in the mines of Australia and with the Dalai Lama himself. Welcome to the show, Art Geyser. How you doing?
Good. Well, actually, I did work with an Australian mining company, but not in Australia, but I worked with a Canadian one up in Ontario.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but what a spectrum of different people there that you've had the privilege or enjoyment
Mhm.
to help out. And I'm really interested here. What did you teach the Dalai Lama?
No, he taught me. Um, with the Dalai Lama, when he gives a talk, it's very nice. When he talks, he's this, sweet, wise, old Buddhist guy. When he does what are called empowerments, those are ceremonies where he works with an enormous amount of energy, and it's like you come out of it going, "What just happened?" And their empowerments in Buddhism are intended to open the doorways for you to develop in certain directions. So
Hmm.
one of the ones I did was something called Dzogchen, which is about enlightenment, working on that one, and the other one was on opening up healing of my abilities to heal myself and other people spiritually and energetically, called
Wow. And
Blue Medicine Buddha Empowerment.
okay, so what sort of happened in this empowerment session for yourself then? Because you've been at this a while, and
Yeah, long 40 years. Well, the first one, I was newer to energy. I think it was back in must have been the 80s. And I'm watching him, and when he really got into it, there were like these huge arcs of energy coming off of him. I'm like looking like, whoa, what is that? And everybody kind of walked out of there in a really great place, but kind of like in an altered state. And the second one was different kind of energy, but
hmm,
the healing one. But that one, I took a group of friends of mine with me, and we all like later were just like, you know, that was like unlike anything we'd ever experienced.
I'm still baffled. Like arcs of energy, is that's a thing? Is it?
Yeah, it was interesting when your podcast with Jay Levin. He was talking about how they actually can measure now that children are affected by energy, like the mood their parents in, and I think he said like several rooms away, so they can't hear them or anything,
Right.
and they can measure changes in the children whether the parents are happy or angry. And the idea that we have energy fields, it's funny to me because people will go, "Well, I don't believe in invisible energy fields," and I go, "So what's your relationship to gravity, getting a sunburn?" you
Right.
know, um, uh, but more than that. There is a great deal of research that human beings have energy fields, and science can measure some of them. They,
Hmm.
so I was a medical researcher for 11 years at the University of California Medical School in San Francisco. I managed a research lab there in uh, studying reproductive endocrinology, how estrogen and progesterone changes the tissues in a woman's body, or changes the responses of the tissues during pregnancy. And uh, it would be funny to me that people would go, well, this stuff is unscientific. And I'd go, it isn't unscientific just because you don't know how to measure it yet.
Right.
So one of my favorite, when Pasteur in the late 1800s, when he came up with this theory of germs, that there were bacteria that affected us, a lot of the scientific community thought it was woo-woo. And well, he's talking about invisible things because they didn't have a way to look at them yet, And
Right.
so he had all this opposition. Well, in 1500 BC, which is 3,500 years ago, uh, people in India were writing about that there were little tiny invisible things that made us sick. And and you'd go, well, how did they know that? And uh, there are ways to know things that go beyond logic. As I said, I was a medical researcher. I'm a very logical person, but I also recognize you can go beyond logic, which is where inspiration happens. And so, to kind of tie that all together, so we know the bodies have energy fields now and they can measure them. Well, there's a lot of energy fields they can't measure yet. That doesn't make it woo-woo because they don't know how to measure that. And in fact,
Right.
there are people who are developing scientific instruments to do it. A lot of work was done in the Soviet Union, actually. It doesn't get printed here. I worked with Russian scientists who had these energy machines that were like, they'd set them at different frequencies, and people would have, you could measure with medical equipment, people's responses, their bodies would be different. You know?
Oh, wow.
In fact, are you familiar with the term the hypnagogic state?
I've heard it, but let's dive deeper.
So, hypnagogic state is a psychological, scientific state, and it's everybody's experienced. It's when you're lying in bed and you're not really awake and you're not really asleep, and you know you're thinking, but if you become fully awake, it's like a dream. You can't remember anything, but you weren't actually asleep, and they call that the hypnagogic state. And I was working with a man who was one of the people who developed Atari into $1 billion company, a man named Ron Gordon. And he had this brain mapping equipment, and he was looking for ways to put people into the hypnagogic state, because when people are in that state, it's easy to change old unconscious programming. And he had this scientific equipment. He had a lot of money, so he could buy this really great equipment. And like with the EKG, there'd be a little, needle that would write, and the paper would have like images of the brain. And when a part of the brain went in the hypnagogic state, it would make little dark spots. So we were trying neurolinguistic programming techniques and hypnosis and different things to put people in that state. When we would turn on this energy machine to the right frequency, the whole brain would get marked dark as being in it. And it's like Ron had never seen anything like it ever. And and you could see it, and you turn the machine off, it would change. They would slowly get out of it. You turn it on, they'd get in it. And this worked whether if the machine was in the next room and they didn't know what, all the things you need for a good scientific experiment. So long-winded way to say that there's actually a lot of scientific research on the human energy field, that some of it corresponds to the ancient ideas of chakras and energy field and aura. And the problem is it's really hard to get it published. That scientific journals are afraid to publish that kind of research because they'll get attacked. And I'm blanking. Rupert Sheldrake, who was a professor at Cambridge at one point, and he wrote a book. They retitled it, but originally I think it was something about the taboo, and it was about how anything that's woo-woo, if you do a scientific study, and I mean the scientific study of it, you'll get attacked. So I just want people to know there's actually a lot of research out there. In the U.S., it's hard to get it published. Again, weirdly, in the Soviet Union, people have told me who were from the Soviet Union, like, oh yeah, there were a lot of things published on that, but they're in Russian.
Now, have you gone into trance to learn Russian then?
Oh God, I should have. I studied a little Russian when I was in college. It was one of the worst experiences of my life. It didn't dawn on me you'd have to learn a new alphabet and how to print it and write it.
Oh, I hear you
For
on
starters, it was one of those things I didn't think about that.
But isn't sound and language just different frequencies as well?
Oh, absolutely. In this whole energy technique, chanting, toning, certain sounds have certain effects vibrationally on the mind and the body.
Oh, absolutely. Wow. And one thing that's always like, when I hear about the energy work in recording different energies and frequencies, I go, well, there's this aircraft that was sent out into space that is now like millions of years away from us, and we're still getting signals from it.
Right.
And I shouldn't say million of years, millions of kilometers, miles.
Miles, yeah, right. Sorry.
And we're still getting frequencies, sound, sent to us that are being recorded. And it just blows my mind that we can travel the vastness of that much space and be able to hone in on something. But person to person, something that we feel, apparently is a struggle to record and find out.
Well, it's because it's different frequencies,
Mm-hmm.
and people can train. As a human being, you can be trained to notice them, and I think Jay talked about this too. Everybody notices them. You can walk into a room and that there was an argument. Even though
Right.
everybody's quiet, you walk in and it's like, or how certain people, they come into the room and everybody feels better. They don't necessarily say anything or anything. It's just things get better. But
Right.
the thing that really makes me laugh is a lot of the people who would think this was woo woo. You'll hear a sports announcer go, "The energy of the fans is amazing." It's like we all experience it, and yet for somehow people are afraid of it. And as somebody who was involved in science, I appreciate that a lot of people in science are trying to protect the world from superstition and nonsense. And the problem is that a certain amount of science is also superstition and nonsense. That's why
Yeah.
science keeps evolving. And but just because again they don't understand it. When I was working at the medical school, I started receiving acupuncture, and it was really helping me. And some of the doctors I would talk to would go, "Well, I believe acupuncture can help with pain relief, but nothing else." And I'd go, "So that's logical to you that acupuncture can help with one of the most intractable problems in medicine, but you don't
Right.
believe it can help your digestion?" It's like, I go, there's no logic to that.
Oh, exactly. And it's not like it's a belief system when you're recording results.
Yeah, and there's a great deal of research on acupuncture again in Asia, and
Yeah.
in good double blind studies, and uh, in fact,
Now,
we had a woman in our lab for a while from China,
mhm.
and she was doing some research on a black fungus they would give people to prevent heart attacks, and it turned out that it worked. I mean that it had the same kind of action that aspirin would have. So,
Right.
but a lot of people would go, "Oh, some stupid black fungus that these old Chinese guys give to people," and it's like, no, it actually was real. you know?
Well, on top of that, just to put this in perspective for the listeners, is that you've actually done like team building energetic stuff for pharmaceutical companies, like some
Right?
high ups in them.
Yeah, my major clients have been interestingly have been pharmaceutical companies, and when I would go in and work with a team or with leaders, I wouldn't. They're not bringing me in to do energy work, so I don't believe in preaching my beliefs to somebody, even if that's not why they hired me. But I would use energy work with people because there's ways you can get permission from their energy field. It doesn't have to be from the conscious mind. And if I got like leave me alone, I would. And people would often a team of people might come in who hated each other, and we'd turn it around completely. And part of it was the other kinds of things we were doing. And a lot of it, though, I'd work with the energy of the group. And people would often go, "That was kind of magical." And I go, "Yes, it was." And every now and then somebody would take me aside and they'd go, "I know what you were doing." People who studied energy, even in pharmaceutical companies, there are people who've studied energy work, and they just kind of take me aside and go, "I know what was happening."
Right. Yeah.
And I want to make it clear to people, when you do energy work with integrity, it's not about controlling people, but you
Right.
you can set up so if I'm working with a team, even if they hate each other, on an inner level, they'd rather get along. Nobody wants to go to work and hate the people they're with. So I would tap into that, and I would just bring in energies that would facilitate that, not force it. And that's an important distinction. You can force people psychologically, you can force people energetically, you can force people emotionally, or you can set it up psychologically so that it's easy to collaborate. You can set it up energetically, you can set it up emotionally. So when I
So how on earth do you do that? Like, how do you date people that are just like, I cannot stand being in this room anymore with someone, and make a flip?
Well, it's what I teach people to do, but it's actually really simple.
Okay.
People think it's hard. It's not. And um, I'm a little reluctant to talk about it without some kind of support, because when I first learned energy work, they just taught us all this stuff, and it was great, and I could do amazing things with people and myself, but they didn't teach me how to do it safely. And like anything powerful, you need to know. It's the same way you don't hand a kid the keys to the car and go have fun. Here's a steering wheel, here's an accelerator. It's like, no, you need to know how to do it safely. In the same way with energy, but the fundamental principle is that energy follows thought and intention, which sounds too simple. And well, I will tell people something that they can do that's really, really easy. Uh, and I'll give an example of it. So we were working with a group. I think it was either Pfizer or GlaxoSmithKline. I'm blanking out right now who it was with, but they'd reorganized things, and it was really affecting people in this department, even where they lived and stuff. So we had a meeting, and there was about 160 people from the company, and there were 6 of us consultants because at times we needed to break into small groups. Well, you don't have 6 consultants in the front of the room. So some of my colleagues were leading the discussion, and we'd had a really good day, but people were starting to get irritable and grumpy with one another. And I was standing in the back of the room with the woman who owned the consulting company. And I went, and she was aware of energy too. And I went, how's the room feel to you right now? And she goes, it's really heavy energy. And I go, tell me how it feels in 5 minutes. And honestly, all I did was imagine there was a magnet outside the room. And I imagined any energy in the room that wasn't helpful went to that magnet and dropped in the earth and got recycled. And then I imagined the room was getting filled with energies of collaboration, creative problem solving, those kind of, so not forcing anything on anybody, but just bringing in that more of that potential. So clearing out the grumpiness and bringing in that potential.
Right.
In 5 minutes, she comes, she goes, it's totally different. And the conversations changed. People went back to being collaborative. I mean, it can be really, really simple.
So you did this first with yourself, and then you kind of guided everybody in the room to
No, in this
follow
case,
in your case, or
no, in this case, I just did it for them. But but again, this is where there's ways that you can connect with them energetically and find out what the permission level is. And they were giving me permission to do it on an inner level, which it isn't as complicated as it sounds. It's actually pretty simple, but you need to learn how to do it. So, and again, I wasn't forcing anything on anybody. It was just as people get emotional, they release that energy into the room. Like we talked about earlier, you walk into a room where people have been arguing, you could feel it. And so I was just clearing that energy out, which I had a right to do, and also had a right to do because I was one of the people they were paying to give them a good meeting.
There you go.
I mean, and think of it like if you were having a dinner party. You don't force people to have a good time, but you try to set up the environment so that it's easy to have a good time. Well, you can do that energetically. I just cleared out the grumpiness and
Right.
all of that. And I just brought in energies of collaboration, creative problem solving, and that kind of thing. And nothing's getting forced on anybody. So if they don't want it, they don't have to use it. But on an inner level, they want it because they don't want to be having an unhappy meeting.
So that seems to be a roadblock with some people out there in this world as they think about sales and marketing, is that, oh, well, now there's neuro-linguistic program and marketing or something. They're trying to force me to do something I don't want to do. Where have you kind of seen this then with energy work, and how could it have maybe gotten a bad rep as well as being the spiritual side of things?
Well, anything powerful you can misuse. So you take psychology. You can psychology to
there's a field in it, dark psychology, right?
Yeah, and there's brainwashing. There's
right.
There's torture. The psychological. So I mean, NLP was. People think it was developed, but a lot of what you hear about NLP is how people use it in marketing, sales, or how to get laid. One guy,
right.
That guy was kind of a jerk, but that's another story. But that wasn't what NLP was developed as a way for people to make deep and rapid personal changes more rapidly
Ah,
than
yes.
traditional psychology. And the true nature of NLP was studying a person's subjective experience. How do they organize their inner world? And how does that affect everything they do? So if you could have put Kobe Bryant's brain in my body, I'd have been one hell of a short, great basketball player. I wouldn't have had his body, but his brain would have run me differently. And so your internal world affects everything in your life. So NLP is the study of that and how it either causes problems or how you can transfer skills. So of course, people use NLP in sales and marketing, and you can use it with integrity. So when you're using it with integrity, you put the benefits out in a way that the people that it's good for go, oh yeah, and you can use it to try to manipulate and bamboozle people, just like psychology or anything else. So, but NLP is not. That wasn't the intention behind NLP, and it's the same energetically. You can do dark energy work. That and it gets into what people even sometimes call dark magic and stuff, where it is
Ah,
about
yes.
trying to hurt or control people, and you can do that to an extent. And but people like me are teaching people how to do it with integrity, where it's not about forcing anybody to do anything. It's about setting up possibilities for collaboration or creating deep personal change. But yeah,
So so
can you
on that,
misuse it?
like
Yeah.
my mind's rolling between, okay, is this just individual? Like, is this just in my mind, or does this go into like things like you mentioned that dark side of things, like rioting, where people that would normally never wreck something, all of a sudden there's this group crowd mentality. So what's the difference between it being more kind of what one person control within themselves or versus you have no control, it's what the group collective around you has?
Well, again, I would compare it to psychology. The more you learn about mental states and manipulation and everything, the harder it is for somebody to manipulate you. So I'm
Uh,
very sensitive. Like when I listen to politicians speak, it's kind of like technique 12, technique 13. I'm very aware of how they're manipulating people, often in very,
right.
very subtle ways, but powerful ways. So the more you're aware of these things, the more you can protect yourself. The more you're aware of energy work, the more you can not be as open to those negative influences. But what you're talking about, like with a riot, so during a riot, there's a huge amount of energy produced that if you're open to it and susceptible to it, will get people to do things that they would never have done. In fact, you think of something like road rage. So people are driving on the highways, they're frustrated, they're angry, they're stuck in traffic. They leave emotional energy on the highways.
Oh
So
yeah.
so for some people, they're driving and they start to get angry and they open up, and then all that energy pours in, and then they just go crazy. Um, so the more you know about energy work, the more you can be in a excuse me, the more you can be in an energy environment that could throw you off and not be hurt by it, and still maintain yourself. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but can you dive kind of deeper into these energy blocks then with people and how they kind of manifest then, how it changes their physiology, their brain, their nervous system, how they act, how they react?
So again, what people have known for thousands of years is that you have energy centers in your body that they used to call chakras, or they call chakras, and that you have channels that they work with in acupuncture, what they call the meridians, a little bit like veins and arteries that the energy runs through, and then you have an energy field in and around you. And starting when we're in our mother's wombs, you start absorbing other people's energies, and you absorb their emotional energies. So if your parents are going through a lot of emotional things, which of course a lot of women are when they're pregnant,
Right.
um, a lot of times you absorb those energies and they can get stuck in your energy field. They don't automatically leave. So I've worked with people that are 50 years old and they're going, I'm an anxious person. I've always been an anxious person. I think it's my genetics.
Right.
And, and I can be mindful and I can, I've done these things and it helps. And if we clear other people's anxiety energy out of their space, all of a sudden they don't have this ongoing anxiety. They have anxiety when they should have anxiety, not because it's stuck in them. This statement, a lot of people won't like it. Any emotional state that anybody listening has that they've tried to work on, but they either have it too often, inappropriately, or they respond really badly to it, probably 80, 90% of the energy that you're running when you feel it isn't your energy. And I've been doing this work with people with decades. When we clear out the energies that aren't theirs, they still can have those emotional states, but they're more likely to have them when they should have them, when it makes sense, and they handle them better. Because in the problem in traditional neurolinguistic programming in psychology, they treat everything as it's yours.
Right.
And it's scary to think that a lot of our thoughts and feelings aren't really ours. I mean, I don't like that idea. It just happens to be true. And when you clear other people's thoughts and their emotions out of you, you connect with what's true to you, and then you handle it way better. And again, it's emotions and thoughts. How many people pursue a career and then at some point realize, I never actually wanted this. This is what my dad wanted for me or my mom wanted for me.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
they've been psychologically but energetically programmed that way. And so, just because you're thinking something doesn't mean it's your thought. One of the things that's been interesting in the scientific world is when sometimes people completely disconnected from each other discover the same thing at about the same time, or the whole field of calculus, Newton developed it, and independently, I can't think of the other guy's name, but somebody else came up with it at pretty much the same time. And they had no connection with one each other, no information. And if any of you have studied calculus, that isn't just something that just would easily appear. It's complicated. And there are people who write similar books at the same time. In fact, the woman who wrote the book Eat, Pray, Love, she has a wonderful YouTube. I think it's a TED Talk that she calls Big Magic, and she talks about how writers and poets sometimes completely independently will come up with very similar things at the same time.
Right.
So, how is that happening?
So there's definitely patterns in energy then. And
Oh yeah.
Basically it's kind of frequencies and there's pattern in nature, all of these.
Can I just say though, it's not
Yeah.
just patterns. It's all information is transmitted through energy.
Right.
I mean, that's how we're communicating. But even if we were in the same room, we move our mouths, we vibrate air. So all information is transmitted by energy. Well, it's the same with human. If you pick up some of my energy, you get my thoughts and my emotions with it. So it isn't
absolutely.
just the patterns of frequency. It's literally thoughts.
Right.
and programming. And a lot of the programming in people's space isn't unconscious programming, it's energetic.
So with this, is the universe also trying to guide us on different ways then? Are the zodiacs correct? Is this the Chinese calendar? What about people who have had dreams that they really hold on to, and then it's whoa, didn't happen like I thought it would, but that dream came true. What's kind of that realm then? Because this is probably stuff that we have less validity onto from a scientific side of it, I guess.
Like when I teach my programs with people, I'll tell them, I'm not telling you what to believe about the nature of the universe, God, spirit, whatever you believe about that. So, is God, spirit, the universe, are we going down pathways that are being either co-created or being given to us? Those are great questions. I have opinions on that, but that's, again, that gets into to pure belief. the thing I will say about that, what's interesting about astrology is you can look at astrology different ways. And one way to look at astrology is, the movements of the planets and the stars are like clocks. There are
Right.
patterns. And for whatever reason, there are people figured out that there are patterns that the big timepiece goes with. So
Right.
whether it's so if Mercury is retrograde, is it making something happen, or is it just correspond to a pattern in nature? You know what I mean? So I do believe. I mean, my experience is astrology often can be phenomenally accurate. I mean, the idea of Mercury retrograde is often communication, travel, um, electronics, and things can have problems. And I'd never heard of it. And I went to a meeting of a consulting firm that I subcontracted with, actually the one I was referring to before. Um, and I show up and I told somebody, weirdest thing, I just showed up and my computer's not working, my phone's not working. And somebody was, oh, Mercury went retrograde today. And I'm going, okay, what does that mean?
Right.
And and
Why is
and there,
Mercury messing around with my technology?
yeah, but I mean, it, is Mercury causing it, or is it just a correspondence? So I mean, January doesn't cause, the calendar being on January doesn't cause winter. you know,
Right.
it corresponds to it. So I mean, who knows how it works? Now, one theory is, and it's interesting. There's even a lot of scientific articles now about the nature of consciousness, and even the going back to the old animistic ideas that does a molecule have some level of consciousness? I mean, scientists are arguing about this now.
Yeah.
And so one theory is that planets have consciousnesses and they send out energy. I don't know. But I do know that um, it's like when I've had an astrological chart done. Uh, the first time I ever had one done, I was in college, and somebody was in the psychology department, and he wanted to see if there was any validity to astrology. And I never met this person; I don't know who they were. But if you filled out this psychological questionnaire and you gave them your birth data, they would then send you your chart and an explanation of it, and then they wanted to compare it. So I never did see the results of the study, but I get this chart. I thought it sounded just like me. My girlfriend thought it sounded just like me. My ex-girlfriend thought it sounded just like me. My mother thought it sounded just like me. So it was like, I mean,
And
it was very,
did you think it sounded just like you?
oh, absolutely.
Oh,
And
okay.
when I've gotten more thorough charts since, it's like 99% accurate. So how
Wow.
does that work? So I don't know how it works. And of course, it's not just your sun sign. It's very complicated.
Right.
But Um, so my personal experience is there's a lot of validity to astrology, but why or how it works? I mean, I even had it once. I was making a major life change on a particular day, and I had this whole thing in mind. When I was young, hitchhiking around Europe was a cool thing to do. And they just started these charter flights, and I wanted to have an adventure. So I bought a one-way ticket to London. I didn't even know how I was going to get home. I had a pack and a sleeping bag, very little money, because I was 20 and I wanted to have an adventure. And I wanted to be
Right.
totally on my own
Yes.
and totally independent. So I was actually hitchhiking down to stay with my mother for a couple of weeks to relax before the trip. And I just wanted to chill out, and then I was going to go have my adventure. And one of the people who some hippies gave me a ride, and this woman had this astrology thing. And I was leaving on July 15th. And for me, what it said was, first 2 weeks in July, fun and games as usual. But starting July 15th, you will realize you are totally on your own. And it just went down to everything. It was exactly what my plan was. I mean, it was just like, we're all going like to the day. So, maybe that was a coincidence, but it was, I mean, how many days would it fit for you? Today you're going to become totally independent. You're going to be on your own. And I mean, it wasn't vague. It was like to the day. And I remember thinking, well, that's interesting. Make of it what you will. But I
Right.
do believe that either because it's like a big calendar and it corresponds to patterns, in the universe of energetic patterns, or maybe it's causal. I don't know, but I do know that the patterns very often fit.
Wow, absolutely amazing. Now, when reading people,
Mm-hmm.
has there been a few people you've come across where you're like, this is completely different, whether it's once again kind of that Dalai Lama effect or the opposite, like this person is pure evil. Um,
Oh,
where have things kind of fallen in your life when you're reading people's energies then?
well, when I'm reading people's energies, my favorite thing is when I get something that doesn't make any sense to me. And it's like it doesn't make any
Yeah.
logical sense. And I'll say it to them and they'll go, oh, yeah. Or they'll have me read people that all I know is their name. And I'll tell them, well, this is what I get. And they'll go, yep, yep. And not vague things like they have a thing with their mother, very specific things. And I've had the same thing with me. I've had people like tell me things I couldn't possibly have known. Yeah. My first real teacher in reading energy work, one of the reasons he became my teacher is I asked him a question and he didn't answer that question, but he proceeded to tell me my biggest fear I had never mentioned to anybody. I still don't mention it to people. And he just,
And what
uh,
is that?
yeah. And the thing is, he hadn't talked to me. He actually had his eyes closed. There was a whole group of people, and I came in late, so he hadn't even seen me. And it was just like literally my biggest fear. And then he goes, "You don't have to worry about that." And I felt this weight come off me, and then I cleared my schedule and took a workshop with him that weekend. And he was the first one who opened up my abilities. Um,
Wow.
but but yeah, there's just a lot of times, I'll tell somebody like, I don't know if this makes any sense, and it'll be like exactly correct. Like somebody had me read a woman once, and um, and I actually didn't even know who'd submitted the question. It was on a piece of paper, and we were doing it in a way deliberately where we didn't know who was asking the question, and I was supposed to diagnose the illnesses of some woman, and I didn't have a name, but I just knew maybe I had her name and where she lived, and that was it. And again, I didn't even know who submitted it. And I think I'm doing it wrong because I'm not. She looks perfectly healthy to me, but we're supposed to be diagnosing people's illnesses. So finally, I go, and the guy leading the class, I go, I'm not getting anything, and he goes, yes, you are. Say what you're getting. And I went, okay. And it just came out. I went, she thinks she has cancer, but she's totally fine. But she's totally convinced she has cancer, but she doesn't. And then this woman chimes in. She goes, that's my aunt. She's convinced she has cancer. And the doctors keep telling her she doesn't, but she won't believe them. She's absolutely convinced. So, I mean, that's pretty random,
Right.
particularly because the point of it was to find an illness in the person. So I was looking for an illness and couldn't find it.
Well, you did. It's psychosomatic, right? That eventually they may cause their own cancer,
Yeah, well,
possibly. And
possibly.
on that point, there's this term you sent to me, clairvoyance. I'll just
Mhm.
get you to state what that means.
Well, when you're reading people's energy, you can do it through the different sensory systems. So clairvoyance means clear seeing. So that's where you get images. There's clairaudience where you hear the information, like it gets presented to you by your unconscious mind in words, or oh geez, I can't believe I'm blanking out the name. But so you can either see it, hear it, or feel it. It's how
Right.
you get it. And clairvoyance is when you get images. And a funny one with that, like years, I forget how many years ago this was, but whoever, not the current pope, but a pope was visiting America, and it was really a big deal. And I'm doing this healing on a woman, and all of a sudden I'm literally watching CNN news stories on the Pope, and they're like just keep coming in my mind, and I'm thinking, what the hell is going on? And finally, I went, "Are you really into the Pope's visit?" And she goes, "Oh my God, yeah, I'm watching CNN all the time. I can't get enough of it. I'm so into it." And I go, the images are literally in your energy field because she was so focused on it. But it was one of those things again. It was so random because I'm thinking, why am I watching CNN? Why am I seeing the Pope? So that's clairvoyance is when you see it. Clairaudience is when your experiences is like you're hearing it, like somebody's telling it to you.
Okay.
And which is actually my favorite way to do it. I call it the executive summary.
Oh, yes.
So somehow my unconscious is picking up on it, and it just gives me like dum 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 dum. Yeah, like with that woman, like she
So,
thinks she has
so
cancer, but she doesn't.
what would be the difference then between this energy flowing and having these images or these sounds or the feeling for it versus a hallucination then, in your opinion?
Well, that's the question we always go through in my classes, and on a certain level, all vision is an hallucination. I mean, you probably know that very well. Like our we're not literally seeing the world. Our brain is creating images. So one example you might be aware of is, how you take a camera and you move it and things jiggle. Well, you look around a room, things don't jiggle. And according to neurologists, what's going on is your brain is filling in what it thinks is supposed to be there. And, when they study memory, a huge percentage of our memory is made up. And, there are times, and you probably experienced it. There are times when you get a very literal image, but a lot of times your memory it's made up. So what we see, hear, and feel is interpreted by our brain anyway. So on a certain level, it's all hallucination. And in my teaching, I beat into my students nicely that not to believe what they're getting. So you're getting some kind of information, and you will distort it as you distort all information. All sensory inputs, we distort by our beliefs and the way our brain is organized and our thinking is organized. So my students, what I teach them to tell somebody is, this is what I'm getting, this is how I interpret it, not this is the truth. And then, so you're leaving it open for the person to find their own truth. And like I say, a lot of times, so like when I was getting the information about woman's aunt, I didn't know if it was true or not until she confirmed it. I knew that's what I was hearing.
So were there any times you were dead wrong then?
Yeah, I suppose. Mostly not, because it gets a little tricky, because sometimes you'll say something to somebody and they'll go, no, that's not true. And then maybe a month later they come back and go, oh God, now I know what you were talking about. And I've had that happen to me. We're not always self-aware. So, but I'll tell people I'm not invested in telling them and being right. I just tell them what I get. And if it's useful, it's useful. If it's not, throw it out, because anybody who reads energy distorts it. Every psychic, every clairvoyant distorts the information, because that's all human beings do, period, is distort the information. Right. That's one of the big things in neurolinguistic programming, is looking at how people are distorting reality to create their inner reality. And is that distortion helpful or not? So
that becomes the work that you really have honed over 40 plus years of doing this, correct?
Yeah. And let me give you an NLP example of that. So I was working with a client once, and I like to kind of have fun with people, and sometimes even tease them a little bit for a purpose. So we had really good rapport, so I could do this. And he goes, my problem is my father never approved of anything I did. So I went, that's not true. And he goes, what? And I went, what you said isn't true. And he goes, you weren't there. And I go, it still wasn't true. And he's kind of angry at me. And he goes, why are you saying that? And I go, did your father tell you everything you did wrong? He goes, yes. Did he tell your mother everything she did wrong? He goes, yes. Did he tell your brother everything he did wrong? Yes. And I went, so everything he didn't mention, he approved of. And he goes, oh. And I go, I'm not saying that's good parenting, but now that you're an adult, you need to go back and look at your past and realize he approved of all kinds of things, but he didn't know he had to say anything about it. And it changed his relationship with his father.
It would. Yes.
Yeah. And a lot of parents are that way. They think their job is to point out everything you do wrong, and they don't think they have to acknowledge
the good things too. Yeah.
So the point is, he would have said he believed that his father never approved of anything. That belief hurt him when he realized that was a childhood's child's reaction, but as an adult, he could reprocess it. Then it opened up all kinds of things in his relationship with his father, but also in his relationship with himself, because he'd
Right.
incorporated a lot of the criticism. So
Absolutely.
that's what I mean in that everything's hallucinated to some point. And you can definitely, when you're reading energy, completely hallucinate. And that's, again, why I teach people don't try to be right. Don't believe that you're right. Just offer what you're getting.
And I can completely see why they would need some guide rails here to help them on this journey. How do people work with you then? How do they get more information?
Well, what I think is the best way, if they go to Blockbuster, one word, the number 7.com, blockbuster7.com, they'll receive 4 videos where I'll take them through energy processes. And
Okay.
they can decide for themselves the value of them and how it they're free, they're very powerful. And then if they want to get in touch with me, they can either email support at energeticnlp.com, energetic with an IC NLP, like nancylarrypeter.com. So those are the best ways. Another way is I do a free meditation once a week. It's called Change the World from Your Living Room.com.
Okay.
Change the World from Your Living. And we do a world healing, and then everybody gets an individual energy healing. And a lot of people tell me it's the highlight of their week. Right now, at least, it's every Sunday at 10 a.m. California time. Been totally free. And if people go to changetheworldfromyourlivingroom.com, or if they look up Art Geyser, there's only a couple of Art Geysers in the world, so they'll find me pretty easily. But those are 2 ways to experience the work, and people can decide for themselves if there's anything to it. And again, my background's in science. My father was one of the early mainframe computer guys. So I love skeptics. If people
Right.
go on, I don't know if I believe this. Great. I don't do faith healing. It's not about belief. But if people are curious, check it out. See if they get benefit from it.
I love it. Definitely check out Art, and stay tuned to the next episode of The Hardy Brain, the show that takes athletic, introverted entrepreneurs and leaders and transforms them into ironclad brain performers. Take care.
Okay, thanks.